Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I'm going to introduce Kaleem. I said I would. I was going to introduce Kaleem as my closet Islamophobe friend that we got on this episode. No, seriously, Kaleem. How do I introduce you? Actually, that's good. That's a good point. You're, I guess, now an independent advocate for social justice. Previously, did some media stuff with Cage and some other stuff with Cage fundraising. You've been. I mean, anyone in the UK will know you. I think anyone who's in activist circles in the UK will be familiar with your face and your antics.
For better or worse.
Sorry? For better or worse, yeah. For better or worse, yeah. Today's episode obviously is about the riots that are currently happening in the UK, the far right, and some of the du'at that have been mincing their words, let's put it that way, mincing their words in kind of condemnations of certain individuals, Andrew Tate in particular, who have been helping to stoke the flames of the riots. But I thought we'd get started with a history of right wing in the UK, and maybe even Australia, Tanzim. That might be interesting to hear actually from your perspective. But I know, Kaleem, you wanted to talk about some of our history with the far right, because you've got some interesting stuff that happened to you, right?
Yeah. Can you have a history of the far right in Australia when they've basically been running everything since day dot? Like, the history of the far right in Australia is what, just Australian history, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was actually listening to a few episodes from Amir Rahman, and he's sort of correct from this. He's talking about how everything like in Australia is like a delay, like you know, when the rest of the world, like I don't know, 1990s, is starting to. I mean, we're still racist, and I mean the system is still racist, but the way that some legislation, you know, gets better for the sake of minorities, right? Like, I don't know, worldwide, like the apartheid system in South Africa and what was happening, like Australia, like has like a 10-year lag. Like it's like the rest of the world is like making changes, and then Australia's just falling behind, and just like 10 years later, it takes into effect. There's a lot of history. It's because like obviously with the colony, like British colonies that, you know, arrived in Australia and all that sort of history, and even like the migrants that came in like the 1990s, and like it's just like, whereas compared to America obviously and or UK, there's migrant communities that have been established from way longer, right? But Australia's a bit more recent compared to the rest of the world. So like, yeah, unfortunately, like we barely have like I don't know, like representation in Australia compared to other parts of the world as a result of that lag, that 10-year, 20-year lag compared to the rest of the world. But yeah.
You've had some interesting elections recently, haven't you? Sorry, Kaleem.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like the UK just lets America take the lead on basically all foreign policy, and then just says, yeah, whatever they said. And Australia sort of then follows behind with the UK and after them, and like, yeah, whatever they said.
Pretty much what it is, isn't it? Pretty much.
Yep.
All right, so let me ask you guys a question then. So when did you guys first become aware of the far right, wherever you are? Go on, Tanzim. Give us your experience.
Of the far right, like in the Australian context?
Yeah, like where you are. How did you first become aware of the far right, and what was your experience?
I mean, that's a hard question, because I'm in like communities where I'm part of communities where I don't really experience like the full force of it, to be honest. But I'd say like post 9/11, but more recently, you know, like the height of ISIS and that sort of like we had like in Australia locally, you had a situation where the height of like this fear mongering from the media as a result of the actions of ISIS, therefore meant ASIO, which is like our what's like police watch, they were raiding homes and like really, you know, surveilling the Muslim community. So we had those issues, and then as a result, like the far right would come out in the media. Like the prominent one is Pauline Hanson in an Australian context, like many people probably know. So she sort of leads the charge publicly. So I'd say, yeah, like in a more recent context, definitely like the height of anytime there's like a height of Islamophobia, all these like far right people come out and really hammer down. But it's interesting. Like there's a famous sort of far right character called Andrew Bolt. He's like a news reader, but recently I think he's changed his tune towards the Muslim community, because I've actually worked. So there was some drought. This was years ago. I was part of an organization that distributed hay bales to farmers because of the drought that was happening in Australia. And he was super racist, but then I think he changed. I don't know about right now what his positions are, but I know that he changed his tune a lot because Muslims were helping, quote unquote, his people, if that makes sense. So he couldn't really say anything. But other than that, yeah, I'd say Pauline Hanson, like I felt the force of it, and also during the height of ISIS and the fear mongering around that.
What about yourself, Kaleem? I know you got some interesting stories.
So for me, it was before I became Muslim, and growing up
sorry, before I think it's important for context to say that Kaleem is Irish as well, which is important for the UK context for those who may not know, because I think before we got it as Muslims, it was the Irish. The Irish got it really bad, especially during the height of the Troubles and kind of the fallout from there. So I think it's important for context to know their background.
The classic one in the 70s was shops would have signs saying "No blacks, no dogs, no Irish," and during that sort of phase, but mostly during most of my life, I mean, we had problems like when we had the Ring of Steel. So like with authorities, we had issues like getting into London. Our car got stopped and literally stripped down, like searched all the way down when I was going in with my uncles and that. But mostly by the time I was sort of growing up, we were at the tail end of the Troubles. And so 1997, or 1998, you have the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm still a sort of a teenager at that time. We'll avoid saying.
Sorry, I was going to say, just wasn't Starmer part of the Good Friday Agreement as well? Wasn't he part of negotiating some of it, at least in part?
I don't.
As a young lawyer, I may have got that wrong, but
yeah, no, I don't think so. Firstly, he would have been a very young lawyer to be involved, but I think he was involved in prosecuting some of the Republicans, and in that side of it. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe he had some involvement in the Good Friday Agreement. So, but honestly, the first time I became aware was the BNP were looking to gain power in East London, in the area that I grew up in, which was sort of Barking and Dagenham. And so we were joining anti-racist movements, going out leafleting door to door, getting involved in the campaign to stop the BNP in our area. But sort of growing up white in that area, you saw it all over the place. These sorts of, especially the attitudes that we're seeing now in these riots, they were very, very prevalent at that time. And then later, when I became Muslim, alhamdulillah, when the first mosques were built in what used to be like these proper, like staunchly white areas, the EDL and the BNP came out and would do protests against the mosques. And so we were there involved in counter protests and trying to protect the community in those instances. And so obviously the dynamics of it changed a bit over time. But I grew up in an area where those thoughts and those people were extremely prevalent. And I saw it from both sides. I saw it from, although I was always on the, thankfully on the anti-racist side, but still you would hear it in and around the pub, and you'd hear it in casual conversation. And then obviously once I became Muslim, we were there sort of like much more on the sharp end of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important as well for context to note that Dagenham was very racist, still remains very racist. BNP stronghold. It's a really interesting history of the far right in the UK, especially East London, because you have the National Front made up of a bunch of other smaller far right movements who are very prominent from the late 60s. Yeah, pretty much up until the Bradford riots in 2001. And then you have the BNP that have basically been very prominent since then, especially in Dagenham.
That was one of that was basically their stronghold for a very, very long time. So I grew up with those guys around. Thankfully, from the politics that my mum gave me, even before I became Muslim, we never trucked any sort of like never listened to any of their nonsense, and we're always out campaigning against them. But that really was the area that I grew up in.
Yeah, for me, I remember seeing as a very, very young kid, probably not quite a teenager yet, actually, at that time, seeing National Front stickers where I grew up in High Wycombe, which is a different kind of racist. It's not like your far right yobbo kind of like racist. It's the Tory Steve Baker, think about that type of guy, right? That kind of racism. So they're kind of like the officer class, and then you have the National Front BNP, who are the kind of like the cannon fodder, I guess. But you still had National Front stickers sticking up the place in High Wycombe. But I remember one particular incident that stands out. It wasn't in High Wycombe; it was up north in Nelson. And as I say, we were quite young at the time, and I think we kind of knew that we weren't really welcome in this country at that time, but it never really hit home until we went to Nelson, where my cousins lived, and it was us kids and my mum and my auntie, so like two Asian aunties, right, walk into town, and then just a bunch of literally far right racists with cricket bats and wickets and stuff and all sorts of things, kind of like basically rounding on us, and they're gonna beat the crap out of us. So
the right sport to show their racism with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're so brave, right?
I just think it's fitting to use cricket bats.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as Justin Morsley would say, it's a colonial game, right? That's what Justin would say. So yeah, it's it's funny that they use those and wickets. But then we had about we were literally, I think, crapping ourselves, thinking we're gonna die, and then out of nowhere, a whole group of a gang of Abne, Asians come out and chase them away. So that I think for me was one of the real turning points, and really kind of we're conceptually before we weren't welcome, but now it's physically these guys want to remove you physically from this country.
I'll tell you
sorry, this might digress a little bit, but do you find that, because obviously the racism is very in your face, right? And there are in the Australian context, there's always some backlash from some segments of non-Muslims that are no, we're against this blatant racism, or we're against this sort of behavior, right? And then Muslims sort of feel comfortable in those spaces because they're given that time of day or that level of understanding that this is the way we should behave. But then I think it's important to also highlight that even though you might seek alliances with certain groups, unfortunately they'll display a level of Islamophobia that's a lot more subtle, that creeps up on you over time, right? As opposed to something that's a bit more in your face about cricket bats and stuff like that, or So I think there's that big disconnect, whereas like many liberals will think like they're doing Muslims a favor, but really like they're actually racist themselves as well, if that makes sense. So like because that kind of Islamophobia is like very widespread, like even like in a workplace situation, like they might protect a Muslim in terms of their physical, protect them from physical harm, but then they'll the perception of Islam is like racist, you know. You know what I mean? Like in the workplace, they may display it as a bit more strict, right? Actually, funny story. My friend was literally, I obviously won't mention his name, but he said that his company that he works for, I think Nadeem, you might have heard this. We're in the same WhatsApp group, that they merged with some company in Saudi, and so now all these like these white Karens in the workplace feel like that workplace I don't know, did a disservice to itself, because the Saudi is all about anti-LGBTQ and all that. So now they think that like this, the company sold itself out for like Islamic values, right? Like they may not be the ones that are causing all the harm, but they have that sort of perception of Islam, or those ways of thinking, like, oh, those people have like a backwards way of thinking. It's very subtle. And unfortunately, like, because it's more apparent, that kind of perspective, and those people are in areas of, you know, policy making or anything to do with legislation, that those kind of laws get, you know, instilled onto rest of society and onto Muslims, where, yeah, unfortunately, like, Muslims still face the brunt of it, right? When it comes to, you know, getting certain opportunities and being deprived of certain opportunities. So I just wanted to throw that in as well, on top of, like, obviously the apparent in your face Islamophobia that we all have experienced as well.
Yeah, well, I think it ties in nicely actually to kind of segues on to what we're going to talk about, the main topic to talk about, which is kind of like they want to liberalize the other, right? The other being us Muslims, because I think in that WhatsApp conversation, the brother also said, on the one hand, they're like, the company sold out, but on the other hand, they're like, actually, it's an opportunity for us to, you know, enlighten these misogynist men on their values. Seriously, this is the real conversation. They want to enlighten these misogynist men about they shouldn't, you know,
it doesn't matter how
hate women.
Away, it's still the white man. It's still the white man's burden, isn't it? It's still
exactly.
their job to go around and enlighten the rest of us and civilize us backward peoples.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think comes nicely onto what we kind of the main topic of the conversation today, which is the far right riots and where they started off, which was this lie about this guy who very, very sadly, unfortunately, stabbed these 3 young girls in Southport, and then kind of like, rather than focusing on the actual incident that happened and why it happened, it got completely hijacked, really, by internet personalities, one of them being Andrew Tate, and then that misinformation being spread about immigrants, and kind of like that kind of evergreen narrative of immigrants, that they're here to do crime and kill us, and in particular, kill our young, you know, white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed young girls, right? In the hierarchy of victims. So yeah, exactly. There you go. Perfect analogy, actually. Yeah, Birth of a Nation, if people aren't familiar with it, is a film. I think it came out literally at 1901, turn of the century, thereabouts.
In filmmaking, it's considered
masterpiece.
But it's basically the first feature film.
Cinematic, yeah. It's first feature film. Yeah, it's considered. The
first film that adopts what we would consider a narrative and a feature film style. And that's really it's sort of claim to fame is that it's this first narrative film. But the whole thing is a piece of Ku Klux Klan propaganda.
Propaganda, yeah, literally. As the Ku Klux Klan was dying, this film came out. It was shown to Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and there was an incident as well. I can't remember the exact details and when it happened, but there was an incident a showing where a guy basically had a gun and started shooting at the screen whenever the black character, who was a white actor in blackface, would come onto the screen. And if people aren't familiar with the film, it's basically about this woman who gets kidnapped and stalked by an escaped slave, right? Basically, and then the KKK come in and save him and lynch this black man and save this white lady. So it's an interesting piece of history, actually.
And this was one of the first times that we saw this codified idea of the black man or the colored person as a danger to white women, and that has been an enduring racist trope that has been trotted out again and again and again, specifically to endanger people of color.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that with Emmett Till, another famous case in the US as well. I'm trying to think of some cases from Australia, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Don't know if you know any, Tanzim. I know there was a lot of stuff with Aborigines that happened, and they moved them basically away from cities and whatever have you. But I can't think of any specific cases.
I mean, the history, and I guess it ties into somewhat what we're discussing is we're taught about the stolen generation. So, like, obviously there was Aborigines that lived, and then when the white man came in, and unfortunately, like in the schooling system, they don't actually unpack to the depths of the atrocities that the white man committed onto the Aboriginal community. It's sort of the discussion happens on a very surface level, like, oh yeah, there was some atrocities, but then they'll always paint it as this society has given them opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had, right? Like the colonial structures, like maybe they'll very lightly criticize, like when the British came and sort of, like, that's why they'll always talk about racism on like what's in your face, rather than like the depths and the layers and the effects of like the colonial structures onto a whole group of people, right? And in the Aboriginal case, like so many people, because of the British coming, they had relations with Aborigines, and there was a whole generation of half white, half Aboriginal people, and sort of their rights, and they had even more problems and more struggles and more issues as a result, right? Unfortunately, because these families got destroyed and a lot of harm caused onto society, and how they were abused and used and treated, right, forcefully, like raped, and then having these babies, like, it's unbelievable, like, because basically the British had the Aborigines as slaves and used them accordingly, and there's no repercussions. So much back history, but that's only like even just like scratching the surface, right? There's so much layers to how the Aboriginal community was treated in the Australian context, and the effects to this day. Like, now we have to put, like, a quota system for like things such as if an Aborigine gets over, because like when in Australian context, literally every job you do, obviously before you start the job, if you get a job, you have to fill out a form. It'll always ask you, are you an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? And that's basically because they want to give, or try, or the system is trying to give more opportunities and trying to hone in on who is Aboriginal. Like, I think even like, for example, like in the Australian context, like getting into medicine, anywhere around this in the world, like getting into medicine, the medical industry is like extremely difficult, very competitive. But I think you need like a 99 ATAR, which is like the top 1 percentile of marks in the country, or sorry, in the state. But they'll give concessions to like an Aborigine that gets 90 ATAR or above rather than 99, which is like there's kind of they try to, legislation wise, they try to put things in place in order to give, quote unquote, like more opportunity, but then they'll say that as if to show that they're fixing the problem, right? But it's like, it's nothing, because these families are destroyed, ruined. education, like Aborigines and education and the situation that they're in. It's like that's not going to solve anything. You know what I mean? Like that's just serving like some very particular middle higher class of Aborigines that don't face the brunt of the situation because of the the situation they're in, rather than it's not catering towards the lower end of the spectrum of Aborigines in society, unfortunately. So
right.
In the Australian context, I know in America there's been a massive push to try and get rid of legislation like this that tries to sort of like systematically change some of the issues that have existed over, I mean, hundreds of years. And so things like diversity quotas and the term that they like to use is like DEI inclusion in the in the right wing in America right now. That's a huge sort of like battleground that they're trying to pick on in the culture wars. Is that happening in Australia as well, or do they have a little bit more shame about the damage that they did to the communities there?
That's actually a really good question. I wouldn't be able to tell off the top of my head in terms of the reaction from the far right, but I feel like I don't think they bring it up because there's already prominent, like the racism is widespread. So recently we had the yes/no vote for Aborigines to be recognised as people, as the first people in Australia, and as a result of that situation, like people, like the majority was the no vote from memory, which is like most of Australia did not want to recognise Aboriginal as the first people's nation of Australia, which is insane, right? Because for us, it's like a given, right? Like vote yes, whatever. But they're saying the rationale is more so around the racism that exists in the society, where they don't, like the white people, right? A majority of society have this identity with Captain Cook coming to Australia and the freedoms in Australia, all these sort of sentiments. They'll always override anything to do with Aborigines, right? And as a result, like even like culturally, right? Like what I've experienced around that time when the vote was happening, there's always these sentiments in Australia about like Aborigines, dole bludgers, just rotting the system, taking advantage of the system, not willing to work. So those sentiments already exist, not even like from the far right, literally like in all of society, like majority of society, to be honest. Like those are just normal perceptions. Like they're not willing to work hard or anything like that, but not really like understanding the situation of Aborigines on the ground. So I wouldn't even say it's like a far right issue or backlash against that. It's just the prominent racism that already exists. So like kind of goes back to the whole Australia is in a delay, like there's a time lag happening, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but I had a rabbit hole on this one. Slight sort of off topic here, but obviously we think about Australian history and we think about like the Aborigines, and then Captain Cook arrives, and actually there was sort of like a whole lot that happened in between those things, including the Afghans. When the European settlers first arrived, there were already Musajid in Australia. There were already camels there as well. And the Aborigines have been trading with the Afghans, strangely enough, for a very long time. And there was sort of Aborigine writings about Islam, that they were aware of it and had dealings and interactions with the Muslims. And yeah, from what I read, it was Afghan traders that had gone and ended up trading with them and selling camels and as I said, built a masjid on the way.
Just add to what you're saying, like because that's like a lot of that history has been brought up to the surface in recent times, especially amongst the Muslim community. It gets weaponized to be like, therefore, we as Muslims are Australian. Does that make sense? Like, unfortunately, like it gets weaponized in a different way. But to add to your point, there's also like there's so much we can talk about when it comes to the whitewashing of history. Like even what you said, I would say like that's a white history in the sense that like even not that long, I found out that it wasn't Afghan Camel. It wasn't just Afghan Cameleers. Apparently, like the people that wrote that history lumped like Bangladeshis, Indians, Pakistanis, Afghans all into as Afghans. So there's actually a wider diversity of ethnic groups that actually were in Australia that we aren't aware of. But it's unfortunately like the history here, as like you described with Captain Cook, that's given us like the be all and end all. Like that's what that's what I was taught in the Australian schooling system. But it was so much more diverse. There's so much more happening. Basically, obviously, that we're only finding out recently. Like the big one, the Muslim community here talk about is the Macassans. So there were, I think, was it some sort of sea fishermen on like the north of Australia, and they the Aborigines there interacted with the Indonesians, and that's where a lot of like Islamic ideals started coming into Australia from a long time ago. This was like way before like Captain Cook came. So that's how actually Islamic presence was in Australia because of the interactions with the Indonesians. And there was trade and commerce happening, like organic business, basically. I think there were some Muslims that married into those Aboriginal families. Therefore, like, there's actually a lot of history. Like, like amongst Aboriginal communities, like, it's not majority Muslim, but there are Muslims in Aboriginal communities from long time ago because of the trade that happened. So there's a lot of history that they found out recently because there was a really prominent movie that came out here locally in Australia where one of our prominent sheikhs went to those areas and tried to understand the Aboriginal culture, and they found out that those Aborigines had like, it's kind of Nadeem, it goes back to our previous episodes we did very recently. They had Islamic ethos in their Aboriginal like chants or paint. Like, they'd be praising the Prophet ﷺ apparently within their like the chanting might not be like Islamic, but they had symbols of Islam within their chanting.
Wow.
So they were able to pinpoint that, okay, this is why like they are doing, like they have these in their chants, like that, praising Allah, Prophet, etc. As a result of their history long time ago. But you're obviously not going to be taught that, right, in school, right? They want you to tell, they want to tell you that the white man helped save Australia or something, right? But so we're going a bit off topic, but it's really interesting to bring that into the plot.
No, it is interesting. It is interesting, but I think it's actually useful to establish kind of what the world means and how people understand the world, especially when it comes to talking about immigration and the other. Australia is interesting because for the longest time, actually, in European cartography, it was known as the Antipodes, which the Greek, if you translate that from the Greek, it's literally almost literally the people whose feet our feet touch. So it's like the polar opposite of where Europe was, literally the polar opposite in terms of like, if you think about the globe, where the opposite was. That's why they called it the Antipodes. But yeah, it was always considered to be an uninhabitable place, which is why obviously then Europe ends up sending all the criminals there, or the Britons, right, as a colony. But it's interesting, and the Irish, right, because, and then now I think segueing back into what we're talking about, because what civilization is. And that's really what this discussion is about, right? When Andrew Tate, for instance, is coming out saying it's completely reasonable for a country, and by that he means a country in Europe or really the global north, to want to protect its borders, right? Because he hasn't come out and used that line of argument, as far as I'm aware, for Palestine. He has come out and supported Palestine. I don't want to say he hasn't. But the argument that they're sovereign, which is the argument here about the UK, that the UK is sovereign and should be able to protect its borders from these criminal elements and immigrants, he hasn't made that argument for Gaza, as far as I'm aware.
Just to add quickly, sorry, like that, the racists start the narrative from there, but not understanding or clearly identifying the role of colonization as a result of migrant workers coming to UK, trying to make it obviously like with that history, and similarly in the Australian context too, right? Like they don't like the history that I just spoke about. Like they don't start from that side. They try to weaponize it in a certain way, like Captain Cook came. Therefore, like that racism of the migrants are coming here and taking over our jobs, right? We have a similar sort of narrative here, and then it's very selective history, right, to fulfill their agenda, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's selective, but it's kind of like selective in their world of their view of the world and their view of what happened and their role in it, right? So when Captain Cook ends up in Australia, he's bringing civilization to a place that didn't have civilization in their mind, right? Whereas civilization meant and means something completely different to the rest of the non-European world, right? We have culture, civilization. We have our own philosophy and much more beyond that, right? I lost my train of thought now. Civilization.
I think we were about to move on to the fact that Europeans colonial settlers. Always bring with them civilization and genocide.
Civilization, genocide, yeah. So that's what the point was, isn't it? That they were trying to civilize this place that already had people and stuff and thinking and art and philosophy and all the rest of it. And then this is where the far right starts in the UK, right? The end of kind of the British Empire. You have people from the Commonwealth, the British Empire, coming in to basically be able to work in the UK. So you have, I believe, I forget it's right around, you have the Aliens Act early on, around about the First World War, where people from subcontinent came over and were able to work jobs in the UK. Actually, there's an episode of Sherlock Holmes. I say episode, a book, one of the books of Sherlock Holmes, where the guy is an Indian, and I can't remember the word they use now. But anyway, and then you have later on the Commonwealth Act, which basically the Commonwealth Act meant that people in the Commonwealth, brown and black people, were equal in status to Britons, right? So you have this far right reaction who are basically like, no, we have a place in the world, right? As white people, as British people, as English people, we have a place in the world, and this is making it topsy-turvy, and we want to maintain that place in the world. And that's exactly what Oswald Mosley attempted to do with the British Union of Fascists, and then later on Enoch Powell, and then later on the National Front and the BNP, and then Tommy Robinson. And that's what it's about. It's about maintaining this racial hierarchy in the world, and therefore lying about immigration and immigrants, and that they are here to do crime, as if no one else has ever done a crime in the world other than immigrants. But yes, to maintain that racial hierarchy. So when Andrew Tate and when these du'at play into that narrative, that's the narrative that they're playing into. That's the narrative that they're perpetuating. And I don't think that, they've really thought the implications of that out.
That's a kind interpretation.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. But, I think, yeah, perhaps it is kind, actually. Perhaps we do need to be a bit more harsher on them and say kind of like maybe they do know full well what they're doing. Maybe they do know full well the implications of it. It's hard to ignore what's happening in the UK now. It's very, very hard to ignore what's happening in the UK right now. We're literally burning. There's videos of subhanallah, I'm in Manchester where my wife's family's from, not far from where they're from. There was a video of some guy running around with a chainsaw after an Asian family, in a petrol station. There were people being lynched, people being attacked, and I was saying to Kaleem earlier on, I really think that this is only going to end, these riots are only going to end when someone has been murdered. Unfortunately, I think that's the point we're going to get to before this stops. Yeah.
I obviously hope that it doesn't come to that. It doesn't come to someone dying. But unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that's happened in the past, and people are pushing that forward. And this, especially with this narrative that we've seen, which has really taken hold in the far right, that the asylum seekers are young, and they use this term, young fighting age males who are involved in an invasion. And Andrew Tate specifically used that language as well. And what is that? What's that saying? That's invoking military identifiers for these people that are coming, and saying that it's an invasion, saying that they're fighting age men, and therefore saying that therefore they need to be fought. And the leaps there are not huge ones to take. And to be supporting people that are making those sorts of claims. Now, I think everybody hoped that when Andrew Tate became Muslim, when he took his Shahada, that there would be a sort of a period of learning, reflection. I know I, for one, was like very pleased to hear that, you know, while he was spending that time in prison, that he gained a closeness to Quran, and reading the Quran in prison. And I hope that maybe that would have brought along a more reflective dialogue with how he interacts and reacts with the world around him. But he's been a Muslim for a year now, and a lot of the sorts of behaviour that we saw before.
Oh, it's longer than a year, isn't it? I think it's closer to 2 years, right?
Is it 2 years now?
I think it's closer to 2 years, yeah.
But when you're doing a talk and you're putting out a video, and the main upshot of that video is that a masjid nearly gets burned to the ground, that a masjid comes under attack, as a Muslim, that must give you pause for thought. If that doesn't make you stop in your tracks and think, well, hang on, what am I doing here? What's my involvement here? What am I saying? That I've been one of the leading contributors in a mosque being attacked, then there's an issue there. And we constantly, as Muslims, we have to live in a world of self-reflection, live in a world of self-accountability, because we should be of the understanding that we're going to be held to account for everything that we say and everything that we do. And the larger our platform is, the more people that will listen to us, the larger that we, in this case, the larger your wealth is even, the more you're accountable for the actions that you undertake and the things that you say. And so in that regard, somebody who has a large social media following, be it Tate, be it the other days and people that we might come to speak about later, they have a larger responsibility because of that to make sure that they're on the right side of these issues, Islamically speaking.
What's with the Dawah simping for Andrew Tate? What's the relation there? Can someone wanted to expand on that? Honestly, I saying, right, like the masculine project is all about not simping and this and that, like whatever, I don't really care. But then they're simping for Andrew Tate, so like they've just they've refuted themselves when it comes to simping.
Well, yeah, they have. But honestly, I don't know. I can't understand it.
In a world where everyone wants to be an alpha, there has to be the alpha, and you turn your paws up for the big dog out
to the top G,
yeah, from the top G,
yeah, from the top G. I really don't know. I cannot understand it. I really cannot understand it. Like Kaleem was saying, I think when he became Muslim, I think we all kind of held our breath for a minute and said, okay, is he going to get better? Because he was saying some pretty diabolical stuff then. benefit of the doubt. I think most of us gave him, but lo and behold, he's continuing to kind of remain up to his old antics, and
to us,
pushing the same narratives.
To us, it's
yeah.
To them, to the Dawah,
to them,
it's like the haq, the truth. It's Trump. I think that's
yeah. To us, you're right. I think it's good distinction to make. To us, it's diabolical. And I don't know, but and these guys somehow managed to get close to him. I think in one of the videos I watched, Mohammed Hijab was like, I speak to this guy regularly, yada yada. What are you speaking to him about? He's not learned. And in that same video as well, he basically says Andrew Tate has the excuse of jahiliya, jahl, right? The excuse of jahiliya for kind of saying I am Lord and bow down to me and stuff, which doesn't apply. That doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to things you need to know by darura, right? And that is part of your testament of faith. Exactly. Is that Allah is one, right? It doesn't apply. So they're kind of coming out all these excuses for him. Number one, number two. If you've been talking to him so often as you claim,
just as a little, just a tiny interjection there.
Yeah.
Seeing as we're setting fire to everything, that heavily reminds me of the Madkhalis. And the Madkhalis will always have an excuse for why the Saudi royal family and this leader and that leader have a reason that they're going to be forgiven for whatever nonsense they're up to. And we'll dig and we'll find that reason. Even if it kills us, we'll bend over backwards to give them that excuse, no matter what.
Even if Andrew Tate kicks Mohammed Hijab out of UK, even then,
yeah, there's some like hidden hikmah, right? There must be some hidden hikmah, or must be some hidden or some abstract, jahiliya or something or some excuse or whatever it is, for him to say things he's saying. But I wanted to make this point as well. Fundamentally, even if we were to accept or any of these excuses that he's jahal, he's ignorant of the fiqh or he's ignorant of the aqidah, the points he's making are not points of fiqh and aqidah. These are political points. These are points that are to do with kind of like, now it's a very real and lived experience where, as Kaleem kind of said earlier on, we're seeing masajid being burnt and attacked based on the words this man said, right? That's nothing to do with aqidah. That's nothing to do with fiqh. That is to do with perpetuating this narrative that we just unpacked. We spent 40 minutes unpacking about immigration and civilization and so on, and being unremorseful in doing that. And these guys, I mean, some of the tweets that they've said is like, Brother Tate, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Tate, please don't acquiesce to the right wing. It's like, where is it? Why have you not taken your shirt off, bruv? Right? Where's that Mohammed Hijab? And then I don't know if you saw the other video I sent you guys. He's talking about Alex Jones. I may not have sent you this. And he just, I really don't want to speak bad about the brother from just from
I saw that video too. That was atrocious. I was actually shocked. Like, why is he speaking like that? Right? It's so decorum, right? Especially if you're a Dawah, right? It's like, I don't know. It's just going out the window, right?
Do you see what I mean? And it's you're the big man when it comes to certain things.
You're gonna have to fill me and the rest of the audience in on this video.
It's it's really not worth much more time. It's just really deplorable. He did this live stream with SNEAKO, who's a live streamer. I don't really know too much about him, but I understand he's a revert as well, or a convert actually. I think it's more appropriate. And he does a lot of live streams. That's as much as I know. But he did a live stream with Mohammed Hijab and Musa Adnan, right? And they sat there, and the topic becomes somehow Alex Jones, and he's just using the most deplorable language about Alex Jones and his wife and his mother, basically. Like, just absolutely, just there's no need for it. It's just completely deplorable, and it just comes up as unhinged. Comes out as unhinged, honestly.
like certain right wingers might do a video that's unhinged and they're exhibiting bad behavior and maybe swearing on camera and this and that. Literally, that's like I'm not saying Mohammed Hijab did the exact same thing, but was showing that basically in that sense in the video, which was really strange, right? Especially if you're meant to be a Dawah, right? Like someone that's versed in the Islamic tradition, right? And you should be behaving in a certain decorum. You can't be behaving. It's just unacceptable behavior, basically.
Unfortunately, I feel like in a lot of situations there are two Mohammed Hijabs. So there's Mohammed Hijab, who's an academic and a talib, who's like studying and doing his master's and PhD, and can come up with some very deep and thoughtful points and arguments, and really there's a lot of benefit there. And then there's this person who is a clout chasing influencer on the internet who behaves in a way that completely undermines everything that the first person was doing. And that dichotomy and that sort of that tear of trying to chase social media and trying to sort of gain the attention and all that entails. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, but it seems to be in direct opposition with a lot of the academic points that he does, the debates that he used to do, the things that he really sort of like originally built his name on, rather than where we are now. I'll just on this point where, because I haven't seen all of the stuff that this I wasn't even aware of this SNEAKO person, but the thing that I saw with SNEAKO and Hijab and I believe Ali Dawah was there as well.
Oh, that one, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And this new revert Muslim who's by all accounts been in the deen for 10 seconds flat by my watch, sits there and with a straight face says that women can't be guided to Islam on their own, that they can only be guided to Islam if a man is there to help them along the way. And all of these people who are meant to be learned and have studied the deen and actually understand it, I don't hold somebody who's a new Muslim wrong for that. Do you know what I mean? They're allowed to make silly comments like that, but all these people that are there that should have been there to correct him and straight up and just say, no, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Muhammad Hijab's comment was, well, all the prophets were men. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it annoyed me and it frustrated me so much more because my wife is a convert herself, like revert herself. Can we just pick? Are we going to go with convert or revert? Because I don't care.
I think convert's better, isn't it? Convert's.
All right, cool. Bro, like some people get really uptight about convert versus revert and da-da-da-da-da. And as somebody who took their Shahada when I was 24, care less. But I would rather that we just picked a word and stuck with it just for the sake of... Anyway, my wife's a convert. She took Shahada all on her own, and she was part of a sisters' Dawah organization where like 200 sisters took Shahada, and mashallah, brilliant practicing sisters have done incredible work in the Netherlands, and they were all guided by other sisters. Like that was the whole point of the organization, and it's so demeaning to so many brilliant people out there, and specifically so many brilliant sisters out there that do so much incredible work. And then honestly, for the new guy, I can kind of say, all right, he's ignorant, yeah, but they should have called him out on that.
Yeah.
And they can't or they won't because of this attachment to these people bring a name, they bring an audience, they bring a fame, and it kind of fits the red pill light that a lot of them like to play with.
It's funny because when it comes to like, I remember that video that Mohammed Hijab and Ali Dawah did about honest tea talk. Do you remember that?
Oh, please don't get me started on that.
That reputation, right? It's like, it's such a trivial thing, like, you know, honest tea talk, you know, mashallah, you know, just talking about Islamic stuff, and you can tell they're trying to obviously they have that mindset of trying to be better as Muslims and this and that. Like the most like like harmless thing you could ever think of, right? And they full came out with a refutation video as if they're like deviants, misguiding the ummah, right? And then
they directly accused the sisters of that and brought their entire iman into question. Now, I don't mind saying this. Alhamdulillah, tabarakallah. I know at least a couple of those sisters like fairly well through Dawah work, through other things. And I know of the work that they have done in the charity work and the space that they do.
Some serious work, yeah.
These are people who have committed themselves to the deen and committed themselves in incredible ways, mashallah, towards looking after our sisters and doing their work, and specifically and importantly remaining within the confines of normative Islam. Yeah,
I believe some of them some of those sisters are actually even alimas as well, like quite learned. As far as I understand, yeah.
Alhamdulillah, the main sister on that, she's published 2 books with Penguin just recently, mashallah, both of them bestsellers. She has run a charity that has protected and supported Solace UK, continue to protect it and aid them, has protected sisters coming to the deen in the UK for years and years and years. And you look at the vitriol, and as I said, they brought those sisters, their iman, into question in that sort of rebuttal, yeah. And yet, when they're sitting with people who are making statements that are complete nonsense, but that they can still piggyback off their fame, piggyback off their audience, grow their thing. There's no comment, there's no rebuttal. None of that, as you put it, none of that ripping your shirt off in front of the crowd is there for those guys. But when it's some sisters that are much like having a hard conversation, and they were very clear at the beginning of their podcast that this is a hard topic to deal with, and it's a hard topic for families, but it's an important one, and they wanted to deal with it about polygamy. They were all guns out. They were all guns out on the sisters, who are like, they're, mashallah, right on most of it. Do you know what I mean?
And Andrew Tate does like blatant kufri things, and it's like, nah, man, just excuse him, you know.
So good.
But again, we're
fine.
Sorry, this hadn't been. I didn't plan this at all. But again, we end up on the Mudcullies. Like, you know, they'll have 1,000 excuses, 1,000 excuses for a bad leader, but any other Muslim that says one thing wrong, you're a deviant, you're this, you're that, and they'll attack, and they're quick to attack practicing good people, and quick to defend people who are. I'll be straight with it. When we're speaking of the leaders, I'm talking about the leaders of the Muslim countries here. They're quick to defend people who are shaitan.
Right, so let's pick up. I want to pick up on a point here, because I think it's really, really important we address this, right? Now, the given reason that Mohammed Hijab, and not Mohammed Hijab, I don't want to just focus on him, but people like Musa Adnan, Fatima Barakatullah, and others, right, other du'at, have basically kind of said, we need to be soft on Andrew Tate because his conversion has brought more good to the Muslims than bad, right? That's the given reason. Now, juxtapose that against what you've just said about these sisters who've published 2 bestsellers in Penguin, who run Solace UK, which is a charity that helps convert sisters. Convert sisters. And that's especially difficult for women when they lose their family. They lose kind of everything that they've known, get kicked out of their house, etc. For them to kind of stay on the deen and to build networks, and that's incredible work, right? That they're doing for that reason, to strengthen the ummah. That's now. Now look at what Andrew Tate's done. I can't think of any endeavor similar to that has really benefited the ummah. Now, some people say he's given charity and he's given this sort of stuff. Okay, right. So what? Like, where are all these converts that we were supposed to have because Andrew Tate converted to Islam? Where were all these converts? And number two, what are they? You know, what are they kind of? Who are they? Who is the Ilah? Right? Andrew Tate is not propagating Islam on his channels. He's propagating himself. He's propagating his Hustlers University. Right. The second thing, come back to the riots. The things that he's talking about have directly endangered Muslim lives in the UK, have caused harm and damage to masajid. Surely this excuse needs to be put to bed, but needs to be put to rest, right? Or not?
Look, fundamentally, it comes down to this. Yeah, we're all accountable. And if I say something wrong, tell me I've said something wrong. I'll always be happy and open to hear it. I don't have any social media now, so no one can contact me. But, you know, principle stands, yeah? But the point is that we have to be open to being told when we're making mistakes, yeah? And in the activism that I was involved with, or have been involved with for the last 20 years, we were part of organizations that were treading new ground. Yeah. So there hadn't been organizations like Cage coming out here and aggressively taking on the counterterrorism narrative and the security state. And a lot of people said at certain times that Cage made mistakes. So, and I'm even willing to accept that mistakes were made. We did internal reviews and we realized that we made some mistakes. Yeah. But we were treading new ground and doing something that no one had done before in that space. Yeah. And we still listened to our community and took the feedback and tried to correct ourselves when we made mistakes. That's part of being a Muslim. Part of being a Muslim is being open to that. And the most important part of all of this is understanding that we need Islam more than Islam needs us. We offer nothing to Allah. Allah is offering everything to us. And there is no person out there that is so valuable that we put him above our principles and above the deen and above these fundamental cores that we must hold on to. And that even extends to the best of all creation. Yeah, the Prophet ﷺ. When he passed away, we saw what people were saying. We saw, like, or we can read, and we saw how people reacted. They felt like this could be the end of the deen. And who came in? Yeah, it was said right then at that time. Look, if you followed the deen from Muhammad ﷺ, he's passed now. But Allah is eternal, and the message is eternal, and we continue. And that message was given in multiple different places by different people. Yeah. And it was a core. No person is more important than the message of Islam and the deen itself. So it's not the deen that needs the people. We need the deen.
Right. Yeah, that's a really, really good reminder, really good point. That's a really good point. I'll move on to something else actually as well now. What's in my mind, in that we have over 2 billion Muslims currently. I think it's kind of linked to your point about people and numbers and so on and so forth, right? I guess the question for these guys is, when do you get to the point where you decide that 2 billion people versus one, right? What's the equation here? What's the maths, right? How many people are you willing to lose? How many masajid are you willing to lose for one person? When is enough, right? At what point do you start to actually, we need to cut our losses and be more harsh on people like Andrew Tate? who are directly causing harm to this ummah, right? And it's not just the riots. I mean, although that's what we're talking about. It's not just the aligning with the far right, although that's what we're talking about. It is that misogyny. It is, actually, you know what? It's just the right wing. That's where they're headed. These du'at that have been around for a long time, Mohammed Hijab, Hamza Zortis, and so on and so forth, they're heading towards the right, actually.
I mean, just to add quickly, like, even it's not even just about the misogyny, like, it's the whole package of that right-wing rhetoric, like, very anti-postmodern, like, I remember, I don't know if I mentioned it recently, but Hamza Sources did a video, and it's just like everything's like bashing postmodernism or like bashing feminism, right? Or bashing this, and like everything that bashing is almost like what the right wing, like non-Muslims, are talking about, basically, right? And they think that they're aligned in some ways, and like I'll never forget that when Mohammed Hijab and Jordan Peterson were having discussions and dialogues, Mohammed Hijab, like, the gatekeeper of Islam for us, right? MashaAllah, like, comes in, is like, JP, mate, you're invited to any masajid. Any masajid is welcome to invite you, as if he's like spoken for the whole ummah, right? And as if like
JP took that literally.
Imagine some like older Bengali imam, like, he's listening to this, he's like, dude, why would I invite? I don't want to invite him. Like, why inviting him? Like, Bengali imam. All confused, like, well, what's the situation? But that's what I mean, like, because the whole situation, Jordan Peterson, like, there was so much fanfare, so much love, so much adoration for JP, right? And we've talked about it so much, even on the podcast. Like, alhamdulillah, like, I would say, like, one of our biggest achievements in Boys in the Cave is the fact that when the video came out about Mohammed Hijab and Jordan Peterson dialoguing, the whole ummah embraced and was like, hey, this is amazing. This is going to make strides within Muslims' relations with JP. Maybe he'll become Muslim, etc., etc. We were like, literally, the only platform was like, we highlighted all the problems of that interview, and we got so much backlash. I remember that time. Alhamdulillah, it stood at the test of time. There were people that returned to me like a year or two later, after like JP started saying to blow up Palestinians, right? They're like, okay, we realize now. But like, it took you that long. Like, when someone finally says it, what they've been thinking the whole mind, they haven't changed, bro. Like, they've been thinking this 3 years ago. If they just said it now, right? And the signs were there, right? Like, I remember, like, because of the whole idea of Jordan Peterson and the whole like shtick, the political game. Obviously, yeah, the anti, whatever, feminism, all that. Like, aside from that, like, the whole idea of racism, right? Like, anything they deem to be as woke, they're going to always refute it, right? They're always going to talk about how there's no real structural racism. What is that? Like, they'll always deny that. They'll always uphold the system. They'll always uphold capitalism as an extension racism, right? They'll always play that narrative. And Muslims are thinking it's somehow religious, like, but it's actually despicable. Like, I remember, right, like, I'll never forget the video of Jordan Peterson. Like, he did a random panel interview, and I think he got asked about the Azim Rafiq situation in UK, but the cricketer. Like, that was a whole saga.
Yeah.
I'm following that, right? Azim Rafiq copped a lot of racism in his time. He was playing domestic cricket. And it was like really tragic because he went through a lot. And he documented it like fearlessly, like, and going against the powers that be who tried to shut him down, right? So everyone knows, like, literally, like, it's not even a question, like, in the cricket circles, like, yeah, what he copped was racism. It's unfortunate, whatever, right? Like, and it highlights how racist the system is, right? And then here's Jordan Peterson. Someone asks him about Azim Rafiq, and then his instant reaction, like, props to Sadi. He brought this up in that episode we did when we refuted or tried to refute Jordan Peterson and Mohammed Hijab. He's like, acted like, oh, right, what racism? Like, what is this? Like, almost it's like he's like disgusted that racism is happening, like, as if racism exists and he's trying to deny it. And it's like, these are the people, right? It's all a package. Like, now Jordan Peterson has made that tweet, and then Hijab's like, they're all sort of like, no, we're not supporting, but all these people are like that. Like they're gonna, like even now with Andrew Tate, like he's basically spurred up, like started up, riots around UK as a result of what he said, right? But it's like that's what they are. They've always been like that, and it was very clear from the beginning, right? These racist attachments is like very, very evident, but they're willing to, these Dawah, unfortunately, willing to simp at all costs. Probably they'll only put, they'll let kufr off the hook, right? They'll let kufr. It's probably like they're when they realize it's wrong, and they may oppose the person, is when they talk about directly killing Muslims. So basically, it gets up to that, then they're like, oh, sorry, like you should stop that, like that's bad what you're saying. It's only up until then anything goes, basically. That's my opinion, though.
You know what
it's interesting. So I was going to say, even with Jordan Peterson, it should have been obvious to anybody. I think me and Kaleem had this conversation like years and years and years ago, before Jordan Peterson really grew as big as he grew. I remember me and Kaleem were like, how can anyone take this guy seriously? We were sharing videos of him hanging out with Ayan Hirsi, Majid Nawaz. He was hanging out with. I remember there was a video of him. Somebody asked him about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Sorry?
Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray as well. I remember there was one video of him. Someone asked him what his thoughts were on the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he goes, "He's a warlord." And then these guys then are still
put him a barbarian warlord. That was a
barbarian warlord, yeah. And despite that, these guys have still kind of interacted with him because he has the same thinking as them on women and immigrants and etc.
This is the issue, and this is a huge issue that we have to address in the Muslim Ummah widely. Yeah, which is we're so desperate for allies. We're so used to feeling like we're on the back foot that we're willing to cross so many lines just to attain allies on issues that are important to us. Yeah, and so many Muslims are socially conservative, and therefore on these crux issues of feminism and sort of like modernism and these sorts of issues, that irreligiosity, they're desperate for as many allies as they can gather on that front, and therefore you see them happily willing to jump into bed with people like Jada Franson, Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah, we need to talk about that as well.
all of these characters, just for the sake of getting an ally in the war on feminism. But they don't realize, or they're not thinking in a long-term perspective, that these people, many of especially the hardcore right-wing guys that they're going for, have a fundamental core hatred of Islam and what it stands for. Yeah, Islam is not right-wing. It's very, very important that we put that out there and clear it. Yeah, and Islam is not left-wing. Yeah, Islam is its own unique path and track. We set our own principles according to the Quran and the Sunnah, and we don't need to be part of the left-wing dialogue, and we don't need to be part of the right-wing dialogue. Where we have areas that we can agree upon, we can work in a united way on certain issues. Yeah, but what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us in the Quran? He says, don't take these people as your awliya. Don't take from amongst these people as your protectors, because they hate you. So we can work on them, but we need to work with them in a very limited and careful manner. Yeah. And honestly, you see a lot of that. You see a lot more of that on the sort of Palestine stuff, where people are working together on the Palestine cause and the Palestine issue. And to be honest, even there though, I warn Muslims, don't end up going so far into it in a regard that you then start taking on the ideology of the people that are your allies. Yeah. And we have to make sure that we are working within our limits and our boundaries, because while we can work with anyone, we can't give up those principles.
Yeah, you're right. And I think sadly it was for these guys, Hamza Zortis and Mohammed Hijab, and others. I think it was only when, and maybe not even then actually, maybe it was a bit later than that. But when Jordan Peterson, like they invited him to any mosque, and he took that literally and went and stormed Al-Aqsa, right? Right, with some idea of troops, and only then they were like, "Hold on, maybe this isn't a good idea."
That's crazy to say that. Like, that's definitely clippable. Yeah, like Jake listened to Hijab. He took to the T what he said.
He was like, "Yeah, let me go do this. Let me go walk into Aqsa." And I think it was only then, and it wasn't, and there was a delayed reaction as well. It wasn't like immediately. It wasn't like immediately like this is. There was a couple of days or a week at least when the Muslim Ummah was like, "Hold on, this is not acceptable. This is not okay. This is not fine." And then, lo and behold, he goes and jumps in bed with Ben Shapiro. Who was up until recently was a darling of the Muslims as well, right? Which is interesting. Yeah, but let's move on. Sorry, can you say something?
Israel and Palestine constantly ends up being the issue that divides and makes clear the line between who are on the right side of history, who's on the right side of these topics, and those that are enemies and enemies of truth and enemies of justice, because that line makes it very, very straight.
It's just tragic that has to be the case. It's very, very tragic that it has to take upwards of 40,000 Palestinians genocided for this to be the case, for this truth to come out, which we've been saying for a long time.
Just draw your attention to the Lancet. Obviously, very, very reputable source. The Lancet, in its most recent analysis, put the number closer to 180,000.
Yeah. Subhanallah. Which is completely
the 40,000 figure. I feel is like heavily limited by the fact that the health sector and the Ministry of Health has been completely destroyed, and so they can't keep up with counting the dead in the way that they were in the beginning of the war.
Well, apparently there's another reason as well, in that because of the weapons and the ordnance that Israel is using, some of the bodies are just burnt, vaporized.
Yeah. Beyond
you can't count them. Yeah, you can't count them. You can't count what's no longer there.
The thing is, the people who work in the health ministry are so careful to make sure that their count can be corroborated from every single angle that they count the bare minimum and where they can prove the name, number, and Israeli ID of every single dead person, and anyone else. They like those people trapped under the rubble, all the people that have died from other affected reasons and causes, like for example, unable to receive healthcare because all the hospitals have been destroyed. They don't count those because they want a number that is like cast iron, because that's the burden of proof that they know that they're going to be brought to when they're accounting for their numbers. If there's any sort of area for maligning that it will get brought up 100%. And I had this, obviously not anywhere to their level, but I did a lot of work with the media for a lot of years, and I would bring forward stories that were about Muslims and were relevant for Muslims. And the level of proof that we had to bring to get a story printed was absolutely crazy. And every single angle of it had to be cast iron. And then I'd be talking with journalists and they'd like, no, we have to be able to prove everything and double check everything and from every single angle. And I'm like, cool, that's the journalistic principle. That's fine. That's what we're sticking to. And then the next week I'd see anonymous sources from the security services have said blah, 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 blah. And you're like, well, there's none of that principle that you just laid out, and you forced us to jump through 1,000 hoops to get this story printed, and none of it gets applied to the other side. And the health ministry are basically playing that same game, where the burden of proof on us is so much higher than on anyone else and on the other side.
It's nuts, subhanAllah. Honestly, it's absolutely, yeah, subhanAllah. Just very emotional just even thinking about that situation, and just the absolute absurdity that it has to take that for people to realize that Jordan Peterson was not on our side. That's just, it's absolute ridiculous. And they still haven't. People still haven't learned the lesson. Despite subhanAllah, Palestine to one side, right? The long history of neo-Nazis in the UK, it's so clear, right? It's so clear that they mean you harm, that they mean Muslims harm, right? From the very, very beginning of fascism in the UK, right? And this is the great myth, I think, of the World War II, the way we're taught, and World War I, the way that we're taught it, is that there was fascism, a type of fascism called Nazism, and then this noble Britain and its allies went and freed the world from Nazism and fascism. Fascism in the UK predates fascism really in Germany. It predates the Nazi Party. It's a longer history than that. Fascism in the UK starts with this, basically the declining power of the UK, right? Which I was saying earlier on about, there's a perception that Britain has a place in the world, and this is what British fascism wants to maintain, right? And that place is at the top. It's empire, it's imperial. It wants to flex that muscle, and it wants to keep the imperial subject where the imperial subject should deservedly be, according to fascism, which is, and according to imperialism, which is under the British boot. It's interesting, actually. Sorry.
Let's keep it real. Like, Churchill was a racist and a eugenicist,
absolutely,
and committed genocide, or in no uncertain terms, in the Bengal famine, which is direct hand in, and had a major part in engineering the Irish Civil War,
right,
and with, again, the threat of genocide against the Irish people if they didn't accept the Free State.
Well, I mean, it pretty much it was at one point with the forced, the completely again, the same as the Bengal famine. It was completely artificial famine, the potato blight, where Irish people were forced to eat grass. Subhanallah, just like the absolute insanity of it. Again, because of that fascism or the imperialism, that the Irish should be, again, under the British boot, right?
Sorry, a bit of a tangent, but because you mentioned Winston Churchill, very recently I'm doing classes with Uthman and Dr. Uthman Badr, and we're going through, the book Cynical Theories? Like, it's trying to refute, like, or look at leftist theory as, like, whack and stuff, and there's this book that came out to try to refute it, right? And what's interesting, I don't know if, Zaytuna College actually, I don't know if they promote the book, but they go through that book as well. And personally, from sentiments that I've experienced from many people within Zaytuna College, they very much align in, I guess, the frame of mind of, like, promoting that work. But I'm not gonna, like, make a judgment call. I mean, I'm not sure about that side of things, but it seems like they do lean towards promoting that book. And we're going through it, and it was interesting. Like, they started talking about, like, problematic nature of, like, I don't know, these fields of study not being able to basically, I don't know if the right word is shun completely such figures like Winston Churchill and not take them seriously, and was sort of criticizing that, you know, we can't look at the good of these people. So it may, I'm just like, what the heck? Like, these people are trying to make concessions for like Winston Churchill. Most likely because the authors are white, they probably uphold those values of like, okay, look at these people, you know, so great, so they've done such a good, right? But they're speaking from obviously a very white, racist lens, right? And they want to really push that narrative, right? But if anything, the narrative that we should be pushing obviously is the truth, which is Sky was like, even to like the famine situation and what he caused to, like, you know, Bangladeshis, right? It's horrific. But I don't know why people want to uphold the structures, right, and promote these people as if they've done good in society, which is the prevailing sort of sentiment we got going through, you know, as kids and going to school and what being taught in schools, right? Up until only like now, it's like the tide has changed a little, and these people are now coming out saying, no, like we shouldn't be acting like this. Like we should, you know, like take the good, leave the bad, as the Islamic principle goes, or something like that. And I'm just like, what the heck, like, you know, subhanAllah.
Yeah, I think there's you know, I've had conversations. I've had some interesting conversations about Churchill and George Bernard Shaw and characters like that who are just like out and out orientalizing Islam, right? That this Orientalist philia. So I don't think people realize that racism works that way. That there's a phobia, right, and there's a hate, but there's also a philia. There's an obsession, and these guys kind of had this obsession with an philia of Islam and characterized in a particular way, right? But they were Orientalists. They were colonizers. You know, they ultimately hated you and enacted that policy of hate. And we haven't learned that lesson. We haven't learned that lesson to the point, which brings me to this next thing. Dilly had not one but 3 neo-Nazis on his podcast, right? Talking about the commonalities that we have between us and neo-Nazis. Just the absurdity of that is just like I cannot get my head around that. It was Jada Franson, which Kaleem mentioned earlier on, and Kaleem pointed out to me actually earlier that some of the riots that have taken place, some of the violence that has taken place, were where Jada Franson, at the time it would have been Paul Golding, where they actually went and invaded. They called it mosque invasions. So what they would do is they would rock up to a mosque. And like you know, you were saying earlier on, the Bengali uncle will be set, and that's literally what it was. There's videos of them, subhanallah. There's videos of them, and like if you watch them and it wasn't so serious, you'd think it was a parody. But there's videos of these people like in their Doc Martens and their military uniforms going around to masajid, and there's just this Bengali uncle sat there reading the Spara, right, reading the Quran, and they're like, "Where are you hiding the children, you pedophiles?" And it's like it's just. It sounds ridiculous, but this is what they did. And these are the people that Dilly has chosen to sit down with and have these really cordial conversations. Doesn't push back on anything, doesn't question, doesn't actually really ask any tough questions. Just has a nice cordial chat with them.
Sorry, just to quickly add, like, they don't realize that they're more liberal than they think, like, as if we're just going to have discourse and dialogue with anyone and everyone and come to some conclusion at the end of it and have like a rational argumentation to come to truth. And like, it's very liberal, right? Unfortunately, they don't realize that. Like, some things it's not even going to entertain any rational discussion. Like, you're already opening up the door. Like, why would you open up the door to that? Like, who's an enemy to your deen, right? Like, you know, like, it's funny. Like, I'm trying to think of like the seerah. I'm trying to think like, when did the Prophet like obviously, yeah, tried to give dawah, like preach the message, but didn't like full sit down with the Meccans and be like, you know, we are very familiar, like we have, you know, good, we overlap on these issues, like we should talk about them more, right? As if like they're not killing you, right? Like Prophet never did that, right? Prophet said the message, said what, you know, needs to be said, obviously recited Quran, spoke in the sense of like what our principles are, right? Not from the standpoint of commonalities and let's come together, even though they're like killing us. Like that doesn't make any sense, right?
It reminds me of the offer that the Makkans made to the Prophet ﷺ, that you know, when he was coming to more power, and it was clear that the problem wasn't just going to go away. They sort of made this offer to the Prophet ﷺ of, we'll worship your God for 4 years, and then you worship our God for 4 years. And then the Prophet ﷺ obviously rejected that. And then eventually it went down to like, okay, you can have like 7 years, and we'll just have 1 year of worshipping like our old gods. And the Prophet ﷺ obviously rejected that as well. And I think one of the key things that's being forgotten here, and it's partly because within the Dawah, within our own deen, it's become a dirty word, it's become a dirty phrase, is al-wala wal-bara. Yeah, we've lost sight of that. We've lost sight of the fact that our love and our hate should be for the sake of Allah. And it's our love and our hate. Yeah, we love what Allah loves, and we hate those things that Allah hates. Yeah, and you can't sit down and just have a friendly conversation with somebody who is explicitly telling you that they want to kick every single person of colour out of the British Isles because it's not their place, it's not their country, and they have no right there. And that me and every other white person who's taken Shahada would be forced to convert back to Christianity because we're not allowed religious freedom under the system that they're talking about. And you're not going to kick off with them about that. You're not going to say, that's nonsense. Yeah. When they're talking about the fact that their mosque invasions, it was never really an invasion. We were just going in for a friendly chat. No, call them out on it. Yeah. Have wallah for your masjid. Have bara against the people that came in and attacked your uncles and terrified old men. Have al-wala wal-bara for these things. Like, she took all of that time to try and divert. Oh, it wasn't really an invasion. That was the term that the papers used. We never called it that. And you clearly did. Yeah, you clearly lent in on it. You clearly lent in on the military stylings of it. But all of that gets let slide. Why? Because, oh, well, we might have an ally in our fight against fascism, our fight against feminism, and somebody who doesn't like LGBT. No, that's not the basis at which you find your allies. Yeah, the basis that you find your allies is on the people who are going to be steadfast, yeah, and stand with you. And we can have allies from across the world, from anywhere in any group, yeah. But they need to be people who are going to stand with you when it gets real. Yeah. And we saw what happened in the Sirah time and time again with people who did stand with the Prophet ﷺ and mostly eventually became Muslim as well, alhamdulillah. And those that betrayed the Prophet ﷺ when it got real. And yeah, we saw what happened there as well.
Yeah. But I was going to say, I didn't realize this until you pointed out to me, Kaleem, that some of the places where there's been a lot of violence were actually places where Jada Franson and Paul Golding actually went and fomented support for the party Britain First. Some of the kind of like really bad violence has been in those places, especially in Ireland, in Belfast, I think. But Belfast has been quite bad, surprisingly, with some of this violence, which is where they were quite big.
She spends a lot of time speaking about. She's moved to Belfast now, and the other guy who he interviewed, I can't remember his name, Paul, not Paul Golding, but the other founder of Britain First.
Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but he actually calls himself a Nazi.
Yeah, and he's based in Belfast as well. And the reason that they're so happy to be there is because they have a racist. And they talk about like the strength of the religion there, and the fact that there's no mixing, and the fact that they have a segregated society there, and that is now the area where and it's not been like it has been in other parts of the country. So in other parts of the country, you might have a riot.
One point segregated as in
a riot in one city in one day, in another city in another day, in sort of Bristol, then in Rotherham, and then in Hull. In Belfast, it's been 5 days of constant, every single night they've been out in those streets. And this is one of the strongholds where Jada Franson, she made her hijrah there because they had her ideals there.
And this is the lady that Dilly chose to sit down with and have a make dua for her. Yeah, at one point makes dua for her that she finds a crusader husband.
Yep.
If you can believe that. SubhanAllah. And now Dilly's doing all these videos out and about in Bedford talking about not letting the EDL in. But you've already let them in. You've already done the damage. You've already interviewed the Nazis, had them in your house or wherever it was, and had tea with them. Like, you let them in. There's no good in doing this now. Sorry.
The funny thing is, Britain First are the more extreme end of the EDL.
Right.
But the reason why they're acceptable to Dilly is the EDL are very, very pro-Israel, and Jada and those guys are so openly Nazi that they still hate the Jews because they see, and I'm not agreeing with this at all, by the way, but they see Jews as like globalists and internationalists, and they believe in all of those sorts of conspiracy theories and that sort of
design theories and all that sort of like malarkey.
Exactly. So because they're so Nazi that we can actually get along with them now. No. We don't get along with them because they're more Nazi than the EDL.
It just sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it? It just like gets worse and worse. Absolutely absurd. The other thing I want to chat about. Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, I was gonna say like I haven't really found I don't know, like people with in the Muslim community that have big platforms. I'm talking from the guy's side. Like, mashallah, I think sisters don't really fall into this sort of mess. But from the guy's side, like all the big followings, like I feel like the algorithm only promotes this sort of views, right? And that's why they get championed a lot more. And obviously it ties into the wider sentiments that exist in society that fuel that fire and give them that popularity. Like, I think it's really easy to get views from just being contrarian and about, I don't know, feminism and all these sort of topics, and these sort of far right groups might quote unquote align these sort of views, and then it's sort of like for them it's just unfortunately the algorithm suits the sort of content they're making and they fuel it more. And I think we've seen like the excesses of that and what that does, especially in the UK right now. But it's just ridiculous, like how it doesn't feel like any, I don't know, like maybe closed doors, they may be talking about what can be done and whatnot. But I do think there is a level of they're trying to access the algorithms in a way where they can, the ends justify the means. Like the ends is what? To become Muslim. And the means is like do whatever we can in the process to get those views and likes and whatnot to bring people to Deen. But obviously, like, you're never, like, Islam is an antithesis of like the whole ends justify the means, right? Like, it's never going to adhere to, like, principally Islam cannot undergo that. Like, it's very clear. But I just think that in this day and age of how social media is used, the way we utilize it, like unfortunately we're falling into the trap of what the algorithm wants, and therefore we become the algorithm. I don't know. And it's really important that essentially, like, one of the reasons I started like Boys in the Cave was to sort of have different discussions. I didn't necessarily figure everything out the time I started it, but it's just kind of having discussions and dialogue. Alhamdulillah, along the way you sort of get accustomed to people and their ways of thinking, and trying to take the time to understand their arguments and go from there. But yeah, like, because I started off doing the podcast, I was pretty right wing, I would say, to some degree. like I had those kind of views about feminism and all that sort of stuff. Alhamdulillah, you know, like once you entertain different, you know, ideas and what other Muslims have to say about topics, right? Then I became a bit more, you know, I changed my views in a lot of ways, went through that transformation process, right? But I don't know, like it feels like, and for me, it's like I get shy and embarrassed when people talk about like that past of mine. But then I think about it, I'm like, the other Dawah, they're like proud of this so-called past me. And like, it's like grow up, right? For me, I look back at my old self, I'm like, man, I wish I grew up faster, you know? Like, I'm like, I don't want to look at that old Tanzim from like 8 years ago and what I said and what views I had. Like, I feel a bit ashamed, right? So it's like, you know, you don't want to like expose it too much. You want to bury in the closet somewhere, right? Then I think about it, I'm like, but most of the Dawah are like that still, right? Yeah, they may use more sophisticated language and whatnot, but they sort of hold those views anyway. And it's like, you know, when's the time they're going to grow up, you know? Unfortunately, I don't know, you know?
Yeah, that's the question. And when are they going to grow up? I think you're right. I think there's
the algorithm incentivizes us not to grow up, to be as controversial as possible, and to be as hyperbolic as possible. And unfortunately, all of these things are so antithetical to what Islam is about. Islam is about reducing your ego, is about humbling and lowering yourself, and all of those things, they just don't work with social media. Like, social media is designed is literally designed, specifically designed to feed off of the dopamine hit of more likes and more views and people feeding into a positive feedback loop of encouragement to keep doing the crazy things that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think this is the problem, right? That it seems like these guys, these Dawah, are really more invested in the whole culture war stuff, right? So it's this, and I still can't make heads or tails of this, what exactly the culture war is. But it seems to be this weird kind of space where people are just kind of like, you're either left wing or right wing, and you know, we're misogynist or the opposite. And this weird. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, you just triggered me.
Yeah, go ahead.
The culture war is a nonsense that was designed to distract poor and working class people from the fact that rich oligarchs are ripping them off constantly.
Yeah.
So rather than having you concentrate on the fact that Donald Trump just put through a tax cut that gave 85% of the benefits to the richest in society and made everyone who's working class poorer, you're going to be happy with the fact that he outlawed abortion. Yeah. Now, so the whole premise of culture war is to distract working people from the fact that they should be interested in what actually manifests in practical benefits for themselves.
Well, this is it, isn't it?
You go back to stop the boats and the UK context. Yeah, the Tories love to point the finger at immigrants and to demonize them and attack them because they feel like that's how they're going to access the working class vote. But while they're concentrating on the Tories are going to stop the boats and get rid of all those like brown people that we don't like, they ignore the fact that they just did austerity and cut everything to the bone, wrecked your country. And who are the people that are going to suffer the most from that? The working class people that vote to get rid of the brown people. So this whole culture war was a distraction tactic, and we as the Muslims are buying into it rather than dealing with a fundamental issue for us, which is getting down to anti-imperialism, how to work for freedom and revolution in our countries and in our spaces, so that we can have justice as we honestly believe fit. But instead, we're going to have an argument about like Feminism.
Polygamy. But yeah, feminism. But this is what I was going to say, right? So these guys seem to be way more invested in this culture war and trying to argue some banal point in the culture war rather than actually coming up with some sort of program for our liberation or the kind of like strengthening of our community, right? And that's what we're seeing, frankly.
Yeah, I think I think you touched on a really good point, Kaleem. Like our identity as Muslims, like we're already living in, like for example, like our parents' generation, whatnot. Like especially mine, moving from the subcontinent to the West, seek a better life. There's been obviously a displacement of people, and as a result, we sort of live in a way where we're working to survive, right? Or we're finding ways to survive, right? And we don't, we were so immersed in that mindset where we don't ponder or think about, or we don't have the time to even think about, like what you said, like, revolution or how to, bring justice to the world, right? And therefore, like, we have, like, now, like, our parents' generation kind of put us in a situation where we're able to get some education, know more about our deen, and be more closer to our deen in many ways, right? And here we're on a precipice of, okay, now we don't have to necessarily fixate on finances, right? Like, yeah, like we're still doing it tough and rough or whatever, but at least we're not going through maybe what our parents had to sacrifice and go through, right? And here we are, is this the time, like, just recently in Bangladesh, like, threw off their ruler and the ruling party, like Sheikh Hasina, right? So these are people that were able to achieve justice in the poor ends of the world, right? And here we are, like, we're in the West, where the nature of the West and the structures it holds onto, right? And the oppression and the massacres that the West has done to the third world, to the Muslim world, right? We have a responsibility now. Like, we have a responsibility living here to actively do actions or activism, right? To stop this sort of bring awareness. And here we are debating about feminism.
Look,
like, talk about priorities, right? Like, it's funny. I'm not going to reveal who said it or what, but as we've already mentioned we mentioned his name in this podcast already. Nadeem had mentioned him, but I know this Dawah, like, he was actively telling people that the biggest ills or the biggest problems that's going to arise in the Muslim Ummah, like the biggest ills is feminism. Like, he's said this to people, right, or his followers, and he said it to, like, people that have come up to him and talked to me in person, that this is going to be the biggest, like, issue in the Ummah. I'm like, dude, like, is that real? Like, people are dying, right? And here you are worried about, like, bro, like, come on, man.
What genocide going on?
No, but okay.
I understand.
Look, the debates. So one of the things I've noticed in the past few years is sort of like the abortion debate has suddenly become an issue in the UK when it never really existed before as a debate. That was an American thing entirely. But all of these areas where they want to have this rambunctious debate, and they want to have this space, yeah, the LGBT stuff, the feminism stuff, this, that, and the other. It's within the space that's allowed and safe. Yeah, you can have as much debate in that area as you want. You can have as much disagreement as you want in that space. Yeah, and it's all just freedom of speech. Yeah, where you're gonna start to feel heat on you is when you start to speak in a revolutionary manner. When you start to speak in a manner that truly calls for the freedom of the Muslim lands, the freedom of the Muslim people, the right for them to choose their systems and their engagement or lack thereof with a true capitalist system. And this part of the issue that I've always had with this idea of Andrew Tate as some amazing sort of like idea of a da'i because of his success is what sort of da'i is he? He gives dawah to capitalism. Buy the Bugatti, get the women, get the money. Like that's not
Islam. University. Yeah,
exactly. So what are we talking about here? Yeah, if the reason why they're caught in that paradigm is because that's a safe place to have those arguments and debates and get those clicks and get the algorithm. If you start talking genuinely about the oppression of our people and the need for our people to retake their freedom, that's a dangerous space, and that's the sort of space that's going to get you visited and shut down, and that's a risk that people aren't willing to take.
That's a really good point you mentioned about like capitalism. Like they're essentially like the whole project from day dot, even before they were Muslim, even before Andrew Tate was Muslim, is literally like, yeah, like he might talk, like he might be inspiring to people, like, you know, he came from Luton and, you know, was able to get out of that situation and become wealthy, but his mantra has always been like, okay, this is the world, it's crap, therefore we need to be more capitalist, as much, you know, capitalist as possible in order to achieve all these, you know, I don't know, cars and all this and that. So like his solution is to become even more capitalistic, which is like, how can you like, as a Muslim, right? Like when I personally, like I've always had this grapple where it's like, yeah, I'm like, you know, I work and get my way in life and whatnot, but it's like, especially in a 9-to-5 working environment or business, like ultimately as a Muslim, if you really dedicate, right, your time and your life and your energy, right, it's just going to take away from your spirituality at one way, shape or another. Like it will erode you, right? It will erode you. I mean, you know, if you're someone, you know, is a business owner and is very, you know, can manage that, like mashallah, like good on him, right? But from my only personal standpoint, this is my what I've had to grapple with. It's like, you know, if I'm working a 9-to-5, I have to sometimes work 9 to 8, right? Like I'm fitting in prayer time and sneaking off, you know, between meetings to pray and then come back and rush off and get into the grind again. Like how's this like good for, like, if you're a Muslim and trying to practice as much of your faith, right? How is this healthy about to your deen, to your relationship with Allah? Like capitalism at its core always a road. And I've always had these conversations with my friends. It's like, I feel like if someone is not Muslim, they don't have to, like when you're working, right, you want to obviously feel like, okay, you're always trying to find like that few hours in the day to try to give back to the community. Like even right now, it's like a weekend right now for me, right? So obviously I'm not working right now. So it's like, you know, Nadeem and I would talk about when to record. I have to like full get up early in the morning to kind of, you know, make sure we record, but I have to slot in aspects of when having to do Islamic activism around my free time of my 9-to-5, right? Like that's essentially like, you know, it's always this grapple of like capitalism versus Islam, spirituality, how much it will affect me, this and that, right? You're always in that bind, and you know, as a Muslim, like you always want to fall into that trap. But it's like, so for me, it's like if you don't have that like feeling of always grappling with your spirituality, if someone is completely not even factoring, like Andrew, I don't feel like he's ever talked about that. Obviously, like that aspect of things, of the spiritual, right? That can erode away. But it's like consistently like, okay, capitalism, you have to get this, get that. Which to one level, I understand. Like a lot of people obviously have to, he's pushing people to work hard and achieve what they want to achieve, and like that's all fair and good. But it's not that, right? It's much more than that. It's way more than that. And unfortunately, like then you have Dawah kind of promoting his stuff, and you just kind of, you know, it's almost like as much as capitalistic you are, you're upholding the structures of society. You're not really trying to tear it down and make it more palatable for Muslims, right? You're always going to uphold its structures. That's why like I think honestly, like it connects to why Andrew Tate feels for the white people of the UK, feels for like, you know, the situation at hand, and sympathizes because he upholds the West and the structures of the West. Ultimately, like there's no other way around it, right?
No, exactly. It reminded me of something when you were saying that is, in fact, it's this book. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah says, he mentions this book, which is highly recommended. I recommend that you read. It basically says on Yawm al-Qiyamah, every hour that you spent not worshipping Allah, you're gonna regret it. Every hour every hour you spend not in the remembrance of Allah, you will regret it on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And I think that's such a powerful just way of conceptualizing the world, and how antithetical that is against capitalism and against the message of Andrew Tate, which is do dhikr of capitalism, do dhikr of Bugatti and whatever else, you know, he mentions regularly, and money and whatever have you. Yeah, subhanallah. I want to move on quickly, if that's all right, to talk about some of the responses that we've had from some of the imams and some of the du'at that against the riots. Not that I don't recall. I think Hamza Zortis said something about being peaceful and being responsible. Not necessarily peaceful, maybe that's a misrepresentation of what he said, but certainly not being violent. Which, okay, on the surface of it sounds fairly sensible. And then Adam Kelwick, who's an interesting character, who's an imam in Liverpool at the Abdullah Quilliam Masjid. It's one of the oldest, the masjid founded by Abdullah Quilliam, Sheikh Abdullah Quilliam, and one of the oldest masajids in the UK. And Liverpool had it really bad, actually. Liverpool had some pretty violent riots. And Adam Kelwick's response to that was to make 200 burgers for the people that turned up to his mosque and give them hugs. And then he basically sent a message a couple of days after that, directed to Muslim men, saying, "Be peaceful, be peaceful and don't be violent." Which on the surface of it sounds sensible. Now I have a problem with that response from Hamza and from Adam Kelwick, right? In that there's an implicit assumption there. Because basically what they said is something like, don't be violent, don't give excuses to the EDL, don't give excuses to the media to portray you as violent. Now there's an implicit blame there on Muslim men in particular, that our actions lead to violence enacted on us, right? And we've seen that from this case of these riots, that's absolutely untrue. These riots weren't started by actions of Muslim men. Previous riots were not started, and previous kind of like campaigns of hate and violence against us were not started by actions of Muslim men. These riots were, and previous actions and previous violence were started by just blatant misinformation, which played into the biases and racism of the right wing, the EDL, the neo-Nazis, whoever it was. So I think that's incredibly irresponsible of these guys
let's keep
to come out and say that.
Let's keep it clear. Even if what was said about the misinformation, let's assume that it was completely true and completely correct, and it was whatever fake name, Ali Abdulaziz, Somali Muslim that was fresh off a small boat. That still doesn't justify burning masjids and beating up women in hijab on the streets. Yeah. The brown hijabi did her famous poem, has a brilliant line in there about this is not a humanizing poem. Yeah, love us when we're drug addicts and dirty and we're wrecked and we're on the floor. Yeah, we shouldn't eat. There have been Muslims that have done bad things. Yeah, none of us are gonna sort of like say that every single Muslim out there is perfect. That doesn't justify a hatred of an entire people. Yeah, and we don't have to justify our humanity by the fact that the person that committed this crime was a Christian. That doesn't give us humanity because of that fact.
This is exactly why I think it's so irresponsible. This is why I think that response is so irresponsible, because it's like, be human in the face of, or be extra human, be extra kind of like, I don't know what, acquiesce extra in the face of this violence to prove you're human, to prove you don't deserve to be.
Yeah,
you don't deserve to be chased by chainsaw.
Why don't these people think of it from
I'm going to keep stealing from the sisters' poem. Like they love us when we're not winning gold medals, and in this case, being the most peaceful, the best, the most shining example. Like, damn all of that. Like, the fact of the matter is, yeah, that we saw a hotel almost get burned down, filled with 200 people. We've seen masjids attacked. If the state isn't going to be there to protect the masjid, then that's our duty. That's our people. Yeah. And when the EDL came to Whitechapel, yeah, alhamdulillah, me and the brothers, we were part of the human shield, where we lined ourselves up and we stood hand by hand around that masjid. And if they had made it to the masjid, boy, they would have got a whooping. Yeah. And that isn't us. That's not violence. That's not like unfair and how wrong of us to protect our spaces, protect our people, protect our masajid. No, if they're going to come, then we have a right to defend ourselves. And all this talk, sorry, I'm going on way too much, but this talk of two-tier justice systems, yes, there isn't a two-tier justice system. And to the extent that there is, it's actually biased against people of color, obviously. Just look at any of the statistics. But there should be a two-tier justice system, because the racist person that comes and attacks you should receive a different sentence to the person that defends themselves in the face of that attack. And that hasn't happened in these instances. And we've seen Muslims already getting very, very strict sentences for defending themselves. But this idea, A, that we have to humanize ourselves when we're the ones being attacked, and B, that we should be treated in front of the law exactly the same as the rioters when we defend ourselves, are all nonsense.
My first instinct when the riots started happening was like, man, like, I was thinking, and this kind of flows into our recent conversations and dealing with different people. Like, you know, we're talking about the Nation of Islam and how they had their own paramilitary and our own, you know, communities that really, you know, defended themselves and were autonomous on their own. Like, these are the things I was thinking about. I'm like, man, like, if the community came together, we funded something in regards to paramilitary that can, you know, ensure that these situations, like, Muslims will be protected or something along those lines. So I'm like, you know, thinking along those lines, and then there's people coming out being like, oh no, we've got to be more nice to them. You know, it's like, where are we, bro? Like, come on, man. Like, the thing is, I feel like it's so disconnect from like history, right? Like, what history is showing, like, when it comes to revolutions and you know, oppressive regimes and people that were oppressing Muslims and how we had to do, or not even just exclusive to Muslims, like any groups of people that were oppressed, right? You have to mobilize. You have to think about, you know, where our money is going, how we're going to build businesses and contribute to a wider project. Like, and unfortunately, like, this is a bad example, but that's what Zionism was doing all these years. That's how it's able to fund what it's doing, because it mobilized from such a long time ago when it comes to like the funding that it got from people in the West in terms of Zion. Like, that is why it's been strategized, militarized to this degree and to this situation. Unfortunately, and you know, we need to like realize that and how they've done that. And for us Muslims, we need to protect ourselves and, you know, take all the right measures. But if we're still stuck at, we just got to be more nice, like, bro, come on, man, like, we're way past that. Like, that's 2000s like Muslim politics. Like, still, like, you know, that's like, I don't know, like Hamza Yusuf, like, I'm sure, like, hopefully he's not still adhering to this right now, like, you know, these kind of ideas. I don't know.
Hope not. Probably is.
I mean, look, I might be causing myself trouble here, but look, when there were probably 3 or 4 instances where at these EDL riots and attacks back in the past, we saw them attacking people, physically attacking, in one instance, some children from our masjid, and in another instance, an uncle. and in a third instance, just a lone brother that they found, and they got the jump on him. And honestly, well, alhamdulillah, we got in there and we took the matter physically. And I remember in one instance there was a whole crowd of them, and they just attacked an uncle, and sort of like they were lined up on one side and we were lined up on another. And alhamdulillah, one of the brothers gave a takbir, and you saw the fear shake these people. And alhamdulillah, in all of those instances, Allah protected us, and we didn't explain to them in polite words why they were wrong to beat up a man in his 60s, and we didn't explain.
That's the thing. At that point, why are you explaining to someone that it's wrong to beat up a 60? What is that? Do you think that these people are that beyond, like, that stupid that they need to be told not to beat up a 60-year-old? It's absurd, preposterous.
Alhamdulillah.
What I will say. Sorry, go, Kaleem. I'll let you finish.
I don't think that it's about trying to justify our humanity to say that, oh, look at how peaceful we are, when a group of our children, and these kids were 7 to 10 years old, playing football when they got attacked. And what, we're not going to run in and make sure that those children are okay? We're not going to meet their violence with greater force? Nah, bro. Nah. Malcolm X said it. We have a religion of peace, but if you lay a hand on me, then you're going to the cemetery. And wallahi, Allahu Akbar.
Well, this is the thing. Like, obviously, I don't think Kaleem or I would ever advocate for going out there and actually seeking out any kind of violence or actually kind of being the source of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's completely ridiculous to be trying to prove your humanity to someone who wants to kill you. It's an absolutely ridiculous thing. And another thing I will say is that I don't think Kaleem or I would ever say this stuff without having done it ourselves. I mean, you've heard Kaleem's stories. I've got similar stories. We wouldn't advocate anything that, like, we wouldn't tell anyone to do anything that we wouldn't do ourselves, frankly. And I don't know if many of these du'as can actually say the same. So what I'll say then to finish up is it's ironic that people are asking us to prove our humanity, and yet when it comes to the right wing, it's not the right wing that has to prove their humanity. It's the media. The media is kind of like, why are these right-wing people rioting? Oh, it must be because they're disenfranchised and are really hard up. It's completely ridiculous. You know, the Tory graph, as you called it the other day, Kaleem, ran a story about this the other day about, you know, how these people are living on estates and stuff, and having a really hard time, and therefore they're really frustrated. And at the same time, anyone who's non-white living on an estate is filth and lazy and kind of like, you know, a scrounger and on benefits. This, like, the double standards of this goes, it's just so deep.
The racism runs deep, because you look at when Muslims have tried to explain and not even justify, rationalize some of the things that have happened over the past 20 years in terms of major political events that have involved Muslims, we're constantly told, no, there's no space for explanation. There's no space for discussing the causes of attacks, of incidents that have happened. Yeah, we must, without any explanation or insight or depth, immediately just refute these people and condemn them. Immediately condemnation. And as soon as the white people start rioting, as soon as the white people start burning stuff down, we need to look at the causes of this and have a deep thought about how bad all the brown people are, and how that's making the white people be naughty. Nah,
right, right. which is funny again. Which is funny because Adam Kelwick has he took prevent money. I don't know what he did with that money, but he took prevent money. And I don't think he's been remorseful for that. I think he very proudly talks about the fact that he took prevent money, which means that he believes that there is a program that should be undertaken to de-radicalize not white right wingers, Muslim men, right? If we don't do this, if we don't actually have some sort of like program whereby we sit them down or talk to them, I don't know what he's done with it, but there has to be some sort of proactive effort to do it, right? Whereas with these white guys, it's just like, oh, let's just give them a hug and a burger. It'll be cool. It'll be fine. Like, what is that? Like, how were you squaring that circle?
With just to add to in the Australian context, we're talking about Islamophobia and racism. When the Christchurch shootings happened, the whole media was trying to humanize the shooter, like especially locally here. He was talking about like, oh, how did this white person end up doing these actions, and full gave like a dissertation of his biography and his life and where he grew up and what school he went to, or whatever, all that nonsense, right? But they're never going to afford that humanizing lens onto the Muslim that may do an attack on someone, right? It's always going to be linked to their religion, the aspect of their religion or the extremism or something along those lines, right? It's always going to be like that. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to try to be as nice as possible to try to weave around this. It's going to happen no matter what. Like, that's how the media machine works, and the algorithm and the power. And unfortunately, like, what's interesting, right? We're talking about postmodernism. Sorry, this thought just came to me, right? Like our Dawah, may Allah reward them immensely, right? They want to fight the big battle against feminism and postmodernism, right? Like this huge battle and this war, right? And they talk about how postmodernism is the biggest ill like the world has ever seen, and we need to fight it, right? But me learning, like even just scraping the surface about postmodernism has taught me so much that I otherwise wouldn't have had language to understand. Like in the case of, we're talking about like the humanizing aspect. In one of the classes I did, we talked about like postmodernism gives them then to understand that, okay, some of our language that we use is shaped by power. So truth may be shaped by the powers that be, right? So like when it comes to the word jihad, right, we had this interesting discussion, like yeah, obviously in our tradition in Islam, we have the meaning of jihad. Like we know what it is in the Arabic lens and all that, which is fine. No one's disputing that, right? But no one in this day and age, no one even defines jihad according to what Islam has to say, bro. Like jihad is according to what the white person thinks jihad is now. As much as you want to like spin that, okay, no, there is a truth and jihad.
It's peace. It peace.
Yeah, right. But like in wider society, like the way that we're talking about the far right and how they define jihad is the predominating definition of jihad, no matter how much you want to talk about what Islam says jihad means, right? And this is a very postmodern understanding, or gave me an understanding that is like, okay, the powers that be is shaping the language. Right now, it's been weaponized in media, mass media, or whatever, right? And the government legislation, right, in the way they want to deem jihad to mean, right, which is from a very white Western perspective. So it's like, that's taught me so much, like just like giving a language to understand our kind of context as Muslims, right, as Muslim subjects in the West. So one of the
real struggles that we've got is to learn how to take control of the language and define the terms ourselves that we're spoken about. And so like the terminologies like terrorism and how they get racialized and like radicalization, all of these things have been twisted up and turned, and we often as a community lack the language to even begin to have the sorts of debates that we need to be having, because that space has been closed off to us because we're not given the keys and the entry into those arenas. We can only enter on their terms.
Exactly. I mean, in the case of the Israel-Palestine situation, when people went on Piers Morgan, the first question he's asking is like, do you condemn October the 7th? And you're sort of put in a bind, right? If you condemn it, somehow what you've just described, like you've accepted the terms of the white man according to how they view politics, right? And if you say no, then you seem like you look like as a racist terrorist, right? So you sort of have no option to go, like you're in a bind, and that we have to recognize that, right, as a community, and the bind that we're in, language or otherwise, or even the language we use is like, it can be racialized in a certain way, and it's about fighting back and speaking truth to power, right? And trying to, like, people don't even realize this reality, right? They're too busy fighting the war of postmodernism and feminism. But, like, there's such a bigger battle at play, and we don't even recognize that and put language on that and understand that. So much history to read about other, not just for Muslims, like other groups of people that undergone many struggles, and understanding that oppression. We don't even know where we're at, and we're here fighting random battles of feminism and
Yeah. I think there's so much more to say on this, but
if I could just put a closing thing on here. As a community, we have lost the space to talk about, and we speak in general terms about the need for the Ummah to come together, for the need, the problems that the Ummah is facing, and how we need to improve our situation as an Ummah. But in the 90s and in the early 2000s, the talk was far more genuinely revolutionary, and we've lost that ability to talk about our freedom in a truly revolutionary terms that we require if we're going to be able to take back our freedom. There was a moment of it during the Arab Spring, but it was unfortunately co-opted and died and whimpered. But we need to be re-entering that space where we can talk about the need for freedom for our people in a truly revolutionary way.
Brilliant. With that, Tanzim, you want to ask the last question?
Last question. Before I ask the last question, just to add to what you're saying is like, and we're too busy fighting like little battles, but we're losing sight of the bigger picture. And Islamophobia and I guess attacks on Muslims and this and that, right? Like, we should be thinking bigger things, like in the way that Brother Kaleem has mentioned, in order to do away with the oppression that Muslims are facing, right, in all facets. So, inshallah, we have that right thinking instead of adhering to the capitalist mindset of Andrew Tate, right? Like, try to become more part of the system in order to somehow, just become a good capitalist, quote unquote, Muslim, spiritual Muslim, with views of condemning homosexuals, and therefore, like, you've become a Muslim. But there's so much becoming a Muslim, adhering to Islam is way bigger than this, But so just want to add to that. And also, so the last question we asked all our guests is, if you had an opportunity to hang with 3 people in a cave, because the podcast is called Boys in the Cave, who would they be? They can be living or someone from the past history. So anyone you'd want to have a chat with or talk to. You can't. I mean, I don't know if you're going to say Andrew Tate, Mohammed Hijab, and Jordan Peterson. I don't know.
Subhanallah. So, is an obligatory answer. Allahu Akbar. Like, we have to say the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, of course, of course. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. And then I say that, like, why couldn't you guys give me like a warning so I could have thought of a really clever answer to this?
Want to have a free flowing discussion with Tommy Robinson by any chance?
Okay, I'm gonna go with although I met this person and mashallah had quite a bit of time with him before he passed away, but like, genuinely, I don't feel I got enough time to spend with him, and now he's not alive anymore. I still think that there there's more conversations that I would have liked to have had with him. So I'll say Jerry Conlon, which yeah, if you don't know, go Google. And let's get radical on the last one. Sayyid Qutb. There you go. So Rahimullah.
MashaAllah, beautiful answers. I appreciate your time. I think we talked a lot of important discussions, and yeah, inshallah, we keep, as a community, keep having these discussions and trying to work out ways to protect our community, right? And take actual steps. And, you know, may Allah bless all those who are doing that. I'm just trying to add to the conversation, inshallah. So I don't know if you wanted to wrap up, Nadeem, if you had any last thoughts.
No, mashallah, man, I think you guys wrapped up beautifully. As I said, there's so much more to say on this, but yeah, I think you guys have done a really good job there. Just like
part 2 or something, if you want to discuss something.
Yeah, we could do. Yeah, we could bring part 2. Yeah, we could do it if Kaleem's up for it.
Because there's so much. There's a lot to be said on this topic, inshallah. So
for sure.
No one ever invites me back for round 2.
Yeah, we weren't going to either, but we were just being polite.
Appreciate your time. We're all in different parts of the globe, but you know, alhamdulillah,
three different time zones, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, but yeah, come together as one ummah. So appreciate your time. Inshallah, like, do you have any links? You say you don't have social media, but I don't know if you had any links you wanted us to chuck in the show notes in your organization, anything like that.
You chuck the cage. Chuck the Cage socials and the Cage website in there, inshallah.
All right, we'll do, inshallah. We appreciate your time, Kaleem.
But just for clarity, I say that I'm here on an individual capacity and not as a spokesperson for any organization.
Yeah, understood. Well, good, alhamdulillah. So we'll wrap it up there, inshallah. So for my special guest Kaleem and my co-host Nadeem, wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off, and before I sign off, you can check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Inshallah, we have a book club, so check it out on our Patreon website, boysinthecave.com/ patreon.com/boysinthecave. So I'm your co-host Tanzim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.